Alpine Liquid Fertilizers is your full-season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Visit alpinepfl.com for more.
All right, I am Lindsay Smith with Real Agriculture and Real Ag Radio, and joining me now, it's Nick McRoberts. He's Vice President with Winston Wilmont. Welcome here, Nick.
Thanks, Lindsay. Great to be here.
Well, Monday was exciting for those of us who follow politics, and frankly, for every Canadian. But there are perhaps, with Justin Trudeau's news yesterday of announcing his resignation of Liberal leader eventually, there's perhaps just as many questions as knowns. So maybe let's start there. One of the key points here that I think was missed maybe early on was that while Trudeau has announced his resignation, it's not effective necessarily immediately. There will be a leadership race. So what do we know there?
Yeah, so what we know is that he is going to stay on as leader and by extension Prime Minister until a new Liberal leader is elected. At that time, ostensibly, from what we've seen, he will step aside and that Liberal leader will become the Prime Minister. Very similar to how Kim Campbell became Prime Minister after the Mulroney government.
Perhaps an excellent example, depending on how the next the next election goes.
Very well could be.
Yes, exactly, but maybe not. So we will see. So that of course. So let's stick with that for just a moment. A leadership race has started ostensibly. However, as of right now, we don't know when it would go to a vote, when we may see that leader. So it is plausible that he may be leader and Prime Minister for a little while yet. We don't actually know sort of when that deadline is.
Correct. It sounds like it could be, several weeks. I would suggest it wouldn't go all the way up until the March 24th kind of prorogation date, but right. We've got Prime Minister Trudeau for another several weeks at least.
Probably. Okay. Now that's the second part, is that while it was not, perhaps he didn't sort of lead with it when he made his announcement, he had visited the Governor General. Prior to this, he did ask to prorogue Parliament. That was granted. So we know now that Parliament, of course, will not start sitting until March 24th. What happens in a prorogation? Like do the MPs basically just have a holiday and you just wait to go back? Like, what does this actually mean for sort of all the bills that are in the House, the business of government?
Yeah. So prorogation is a mechanism that the head of state has. So the head of state being Mary Simon, the Governor General, and on the advice of the Prime Minister, basically ends the current Parliament. After each election, we hear about, the new Parliament coming in, the 40th, the 41st, the 42nd Parliament. And prorogation is basically ending that Parliament early. It's the same effect as an election where, the legislative slate is wiped clean. A government will then on the first sitting day or soon thereafter have to do a speech from the throne, the same as right after an election. And they will lay out their, their roadmap and their policy priorities for the next legislative sitting. That kind of gets us into why they want to do that under a new leader, right? They're hoping that it brings new vision, new direction, and a bump in the polls.
Right. Now, those polls, which I believe leading up to Trudeau's announcement, his approval rating was something 22% or less.
Very low.
And so certainly the Liberal Party is looking for, many were asking for this movement of Trudeau out of that leadership to see if it would make a difference in the polls. I would imagine it's going to make some. Just how big or if it's enough is the next question. Now, there is a key difference, though, with prorogation versus calling for an election. When Parliament resumes on March 24th, you're exactly right? There's a speech from the throne. It starts a new set of legislation processes, but how does it work with private members' bills? Because we have a laundry list, and some of them very key to agriculture, of private members' bills that are partially through the process. Should this government survive past the 24th or for a few weeks even, do those private members' bills survive? Do they pick up where they left off, or what happens with those?
Well, we could, but as we're probably going to see, I don't suspect that the legislative session after the 24th lasts long enough to get deep into those. We are left in a position where the opposition parties, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc maybe less so, but are saying that they're not going to support the government, and the Conservatives today seemed fairly, certain that this is a Liberal Party issue, not a Justin Trudeau issue, as much as they would have liked to campaign against him. And I don't see a a government having enough life after the 24th to even go through those processes of those bills. In fact, if this process does what the Liberals want and starts to increase polling numbers for them, I'm even more certain that that time after the 24th won't be long, because the Conservatives will want to capitalize on their high numbers as soon as possible.
So it's my understanding that one of the reasons that the 24th will happen is that we do need a supply motion to keep the government running. That's essentially to keep the money flowing, to keep public servants paid, etc.
Yeah.
Is that a confidence motion? Could it fail right from the get-go?
Any spending bill is considered a confidence motion, right? So anytime there's money being voted on in the House, that's considered a matter of confidence. So, a speech from the throne will be the very first thing, even ahead of those appropriation bills, and it could be that the speech from the throne doesn't even get, passed. There's just so much at play, Lindsay, right? Like if this caucus meeting on Wednesday goes poorly and some MPs don't like the way that the leader is selected, we may even see MPs voting against the government. There is really never been a time where this is going to be so day by day, right? The 24th, the government is just going to hope to make it to the 25th, and then the 26th. It is purely up in the hands of 338 members in the House of Commons.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of the interesting thing, and yes, as much as many of us will find some of this fascinating, it is also there are little details that matter, and still so many things, like the rules can be what the rules are. It still is really up to parliamentarians as to what they decide to do, right? So there are still some pretty major unknowns, and you're right, we still are assuming this caucus meeting happens Wednesday, we could see news out of that kind of changes this trajectory as well. So we do know that Parliament is prorogued until March 24th. What happens on the 24th, the 25th, the 26th? I'm going to say, and this isn't going out on a limb, that we are in for a spring election. Nick, am I wrong, or is that a pretty safe bet?
I think if it's spring or it's summer, we won't get to October. I'm usually a pretty safe bettor, so I don't want to say how quickly it's going to be, but this is anybody's choice, and I think it leaves the Liberal Party's in a bit of a lurch here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's focus in specifically on two things that I think are really important. The one is that I hadn't really even thought about until you mentioned it just before we went to air, that if we get a new leader, we potentially get a new cabinet named as well. I hadn't even thought about that. And what does that mean potentially for agriculture?
Yeah, so a new leader would have their complete prerogative to bring in a new cabinet. And in fact, if some of the existing cabinet members decide that they want to run for leader, convention would have it that they resign from cabinet.
That's right.
So, if we have a Melanie Joly, a Dominic LeBlanc running as cabinet ministers, we need a new finance minister, we need a new foreign affairs minister. I'm sure, we've all heard rumors of my former boss, Lawrence McCauley, stepping back. And so, if all of those changes happen, Canadian ag could be faced with not just a new government and an unstable government, but a new representative at the cabinet table. Who that would be at this point, anybody's guess, because everything else is everybody's guess. Yeah. But definitely something to consider for the sector is that, we'll have a new minister and then very possibly another new minister from a completely different political party.
Right. Well, and that's, I guess, the key is that should a new leader be named relatively quickly, even a new cabinet rolled out, how long that cabinet actually serves is really a big question, right? So now we did reach out to Macaulay's office, last fall, asking about whether or not he planned to run again. And we were told that Minister Macaulay is always planning for the next election, which surprises none of us, of course. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll wait to see what happens. But I hadn't even thought about that. Now, more broadly speaking, there are several also sort of large questions here on things that were happening in Parliament before it was prorogued. One of them was that question of privilege. The other is this foreign interference inquiry. How might that fit into a leadership race?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that inquiry has identified is some gaps within leadership contests and who can vote for a leadership candidate. Obviously, with the Liberal Party, anyone can become a member, and as
Right.
you know, we've seen in some reporting that can include non-citizens, and one of the things that the inquiry is going to look at is any potential abuse or gamification of that system. And so, at a time where the Liberal Party is under stress, their poll numbers are not doing well. They are also now faced with not just selecting a new leader, but selecting the next prime minister for however long that's going to be.
Yes.
Whoever gets named is going to be prime minister, and they will be prime minister until the next election, and they will always have that on their resume. Kim Campbell, as we mentioned earlier, is no less of a prime minister than anyone else because of her situation. She was still prime minister. And so because of that, the Liberal Party needs to be incredibly transparent and incredibly honest with Canadians about the process they're following to avoid any suggestion that there was some foreign entity involved in the selection.
Right.
I think that as well, it then lanes into a conversation in the House, which I don't think Canadians want to have, but might end up having regardless, of an opposition party not just suggesting that a leader of a party and a prime minister is unfit to serve, but is illegitimately selected. I think we may enter into this very slippery slope. And I know that from people that I've spoken with, close to the party and involved with the party, it's my message has always been that of caution. This needs to be transparent with the foreign interference inquiry in mind.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Now, just finally, let's touch on that just briefly. It's been mentioned a few times, the ease of which you can be a member of the Liberal Party and ostensibly run for the leadership. I mean, we have yet to see how that will play out. But why is that so important? You've alluded to it in some ways, but is this going to be just a giant mess because of this, or how might this unfold?
It could unfold in two ways, right? So I keep harping on transparency and they need to be clear, but that doesn't mean that the same rules need to be followed as have in past, right? It doesn't mean that the party may choose to have a full regular leadership campaign. Right. That's going to be very expensive. It's going to have to be done in a very short time frame, but that would involve members of the Liberal Party. I don't know what that number is, but it's thousands of people. And it would involve a Herculean effort to bring those votes together. What they could also do, and I saw former Prime Minister Chrétien's former Chief of Staff, Eddie Goldenberg, talking about this, was this idea of having the caucus, the national board, and individual riding associations presidents have a vote, and they be the ones to select the leader. The context behind all of this, right, is this person is not going to be a long-term leader and prime minister. So you have to weigh for the Liberal Party the effort behind what this actually means. And, there's so much involved in that effort, right? Foreign interference stuff, the money, this is a very expensive endeavor. So I know that on Monday night, the national board met. The outcome of that, I'm not sure about. I'm sure that was a very long meeting, and the meeting on Wednesday with the caucus will also be long and arduous. But they just need to come out, frankly, and lay their plan out for Canadians to see.
Right. I think one thing, if we've learned anything in the last little while, is that rules are important, but also how rules get applied is still, there's still a lot that gets sort of decided as far as the immediacy of all this, the cost of all of it, as you said, and realistically, this initial leadership race anyway, potentially is to choose a prime minister, which is very important, but it might be one that serves a very short amount of time and heads to election. So I honestly, the head just sort of wobbles at all of it. So thank you, Nick, for trying to make some sense of all of this and what may happen. And it's going to be a very interesting week and months
I look
to
forward
come.
to following along. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Nick.
Thank you, Lindsay.